King Rehoboam, matter of fact, they tried to kill Rehoboam, and he just barely fled back to Jerusalem. And Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Now, it came to pass when, they sent for Jeroboam. And I'll skip some of this. Forgive me here. Here it is. So Jeroboam, number one, he builds his capital, first of all, in a place called Shechem, where we'll be. That's not important, but, it is, but not to what we're talking about. Here's the point, that Jeroboam, 2 Kings chapter 12, and verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim, so that's his capital. He went out from there and built Penuel, that's on the other side. A lot of the territory of the northern kingdom is on the other side of the river, so he has a kind of a secondary capital over there. That's Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Remember, there were 10 tribes, and a lot of them were over there. But then, listen to this. Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, which is exactly what God demanded that they do. 3 times every male adult Jew was to appear at the central altar. And you know what that's about, by the way? That's about swearing allegiance to King Yahweh. You come and renew your commitment to King Yahweh. But it's in Jerusalem, and that's in the southern kingdom. So he says, if the people go up to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They'll kill me and go back to Rehoboam. Therefore, again, the king asked advice. I won't go there. Some of his advisors, never mind. But they weren't very wise. Therefore, the king asked advice, and he made 2 calves of gold. Somebody read Exodus 30 and decided that sounded like a good idea. I don't get it. But they made 2 calves of gold, and he said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your Elohim, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. He set one in Bethel, that's on the far south end of his kingdom, and the other he put in Dan. Have you ever been in Dan? So this is the high place at Dan. And notice this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. And for the rest of the Old Testament, Jeroboam becomes the standard of wickedness, and kings are described as following after the Jeroboam who made Israel to sin. I like to say that comes his middle name. This is Jeroboam. This is the northern, house of worship for the golden calves. The golden calf would have sat up there. This was probably a temple that it was inside a temple. All we have left is the podium. Out here would have been the altar. It was, curiously enough, made of stainless steel. Actually, what happened is I have a picture of it, they found one of those horns. Now, you hear that expression, the horns of an altar, for whatever set of reasons, all throughout antiquity, including Israel, when they built an altar, they would have those kind of stylized horns on the corner, and that represented the strength or efficacy of the altar, for what it's worth. It was just a standard way. It's not pagan. It's just the way they did it. Seems to come from the fact that in their mind, the ox is a powerful animal, but the greater his horn, whatever the animal, the greater the horn, the greater the strength, and so on. So the horn, remember, Joab's going to hold on to the horns of the altar down in Jerusalem. But they found in the rubble here, this has been well dug, one of those horns, and it's from that they calculate the approximate size of the altar. The altar would have been a stone altar, and it would have had a ramp that the priest would come up, and there would be a fire burning, and you would bring your animal here, and there would have been a place to slaughter the animal. You didn't throw the whole animal on the altar. You butchered the animal, and certain part was given to Yahweh on the altar, and certain part was given to the priest, and certain other parts were burned and buried. So the point is that this is the Dan High Place Complex. Now, does that make sense to you? Let me just say this, and this I think is important, and I think there is solid evidence for what I'm going to say. I'll be quick, but the fact is that, I said earlier, come on into a pagan temple, you got to be careful here. Jeroboam was not abandoning Yahweh. And if you'd have asked him, why have you given up on Yahweh? Why are you? He said, what are you talking about? I'm a Yahwehist. He's my king. I'm loyal to him. And I like to say, there is no evidence whatever that Jeroboam ever intended to violate the first commandment. But he did, in fact, high-handedly and deliberately defy the second commandment. There's no graven image. Now, he was convinced he had to and you, if you were there, you'd have said, boy, you are in a pickle here, because after all, but what do? You know what faith is? Faith is obeying God when it doesn't make sense, okay? Faith is just doing what the Bible says, doing what God. Now, what did God say? He had said, I'm going to make you king. This is your capital. Of course your people are to go down and worship King Yahweh, because Jeroboam is only the vice regent up here, and Rehoboam is only the vice regent down there. Both of them only are the human mediators of God, of King Yahweh's rule. So yeah, you obey God, and that includes that. But he couldn't trust God for that, and so now, it's interesting, number one, that statement that I read in the Bible, in most translations, it says, he goes up here and he points at this golden calf sitting right there, and he heard all the people assembled, the elders, and he says, here are your gods. That's what most translations have. Mm-hmm. Well, what's the word for God or gods?
No.
Now, are you familiar? Actually, Elohim is the name that is constantly used. It's generic title for Yahweh. In other words, his name is Yahweh, the generic title. God is Elohim. What's curious about Elohim? It's plural. The Eim is plural. And yet it's talking about one God. That reflects a very, very important, oh boy, should I go? Let me just say real quickly. The Bible was written for an oral culture. Now, one of the things, this is really important, what that means in part is this, that if an author is going to write something to be read aloud, whatever he wants of nuance or emphasis or whatever has to be on the text on the page. Does that make sense? They don't have they don't have punctuation marks. You're not reading it, you're listening to it. Somebody might read with a pretty boring inflection and miss whatever emphasis. So the author has to insinuate into the actual words on the page whatever he wants of nuance, and Hebrew is brilliant in that. There are so many ways in which I could, and I'm not at all an expert. Pete Gaiman is fabulous at this, but our Old Testament guy. But one of the ways is what's called the plural of majesty. If you want to speak of something that is really distinctively important, even though you're talking about a singular noun, you put it in the plural. Almost half the times in the Bible, Old and New Testament, when the word Sabbath is used, it's in the plural, even though it's talking about one day. But it's a special day. Well, the word El is almost always used of God as Elohim. It's the plural of majesty. What do you care? When Jeroboam stands up here and says, he doesn't say, here are your gods. He says, behold, Elohim. So now we got to ask ourselves, does he mean that to be plural because he's now a pagan? See what I'm saying? Is he a polytheist now? Or does he mean that to be singular because he's referring to Yahweh? Well, he says, behold Elohim who brought you up out of Egypt. So I'm saying that and it's interesting, I'm beating you up here a little bit, but they found, and I don't know exactly well, they found 2 huge pits of animal bones. For hundreds of years, this was a place of sacrifice. And they would take those animals, and after they butchered them and so on, and they would bury the bones. And there were 2 chambers where they found these bones, thousands upon thousands, they say, of bones, and they went through them. And they could tell that one was for the common man, it was just kind of refuse area, and the other was for the priests. And one of the notable, there were 2 notable discoveries they made. Number one was that in the area for the common man, this is where they would take the animal that had been butchered and buried and so on. In the area for the common man, there were basically no right side. The right forelimb or hind limb of the animal was to be given to the priest. So according to Leviticus, my point is, so they found that in the priestly, the ditch where they were digging, they were burying the priestly animals, they had all those right limbs because that was theirs. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. They also found that they had a lot of hooves and toenails, or the phalange as it's called. And the reason is because the priest also got the skin. And generally when they skinned the animal, they just tore it off with the toe. Now, what does that mean? It means that they were being quite punctilious about Levitical standards. As they sacrificed here, they were reading and honoring the Levitical standards, which means, I think this is huge, that's why I spend the time, Jeroboam his middle name, who made Israel to sin, if you'd interviewed him, he'd have said, what are you talking about? I'm a Yahwehist. I'm loyal to Yahweh. But I got to make a little compromise because I got an issue here. And once you make that compromise, things start to fall apart. And I think this is the first step toward Jezebel. So, not too many years later, after Jeroboam, along comes another king by the name of Ahab, and he decides to go whole hog and go after the first commandment. But I would argue it starts here with this public, deliberate compromise where they say, we're going to follow Yahweh, but because of circumstances in our lives, it wouldn't be wise to obey what he says about going down to Jerusalem. That's too far, so he'll stay here. Does that make sense to you? All right, this is a hugely important part. Yeah, maybe.
The significance of the path,
Yeah, good point. He seems to be duplicating Exodus, which is, to me, is this not crazy? But remember there it was the golden calves who, it's sort of the idea is that this is the steed upon which Yahweh rides, right, or something like this. So they're not trying to replicate Yahweh with a calf, but they are making a graven image to facilitate your worship of Yahweh. And that is precisely what the second commandment forbids. Yeah, good point. All right, very good. Take some pictures. Now listen, what time is it? What in the world time is it?
12:13.
How hungry are you?